Hello and welcome to another Dungeons & Dragons session dramatization set in the world of Alter Aeon. Our protagonists are Kara the Warmage, Morden the Hexblade, Tess the Sorceress, and Sienna the Rogue. I am Shadowfax, the Dungeon Master. Session 15, Fallen Star. Before we start this session's narrative, there were a couple of details I neglected to mention in the last session's dramatization. When Morden was brought back to life by Tess's wish, a white streak appeared in his hair. Noting that his magical companion failed to reappear when Morden was resurrected, his companions had asked him where it was. Morden tried to summon it, but was unable to do so. He had no idea why. They also agreed that the wish Tess had used to bring Morden back to life was actually his wish, and she still had a wish to make. Our session was especially long, so when we reached the end, the players had a lot of questions. There's a lot of exposition dumped at the end in anticipation of some of those questions and to help grease the wheels for our next session. Our intrepid heroes decided to explore the mined and mysterious chamber that Sienna had found at the bottom. Kara lowered the other three down with the elevator, and then flew through the open shaft to join them. They split up, with Kara and Tess searching the mine, while Morden and Sienna went further down. Sienna's makeshift harness was still intact when he and Morden arrived, so Morden lowered Sienna down, and the kobold got to work disabling all the traps. While thus engaged, the girls found some recently mined amethyst and a barrel of animantite ore, and then went down to Morden to report what they had found. Sienna found 4 blade traps in the chamber, which he disabled using debris he found lying around, and called up to say that it was all clear. He untied the rope harness, and the others lowered themselves down into the chamber. Kara, Morden, and Tess were relieved to be able to stand again, as they had to crawl through most of the kobold-sized mine tunnels. Sienna said that the traps had been jammed, but the triggers were in the walls, and asked Morden to help him up high enough to reach them. He found 2 hidden wind veins, which he removed and presented to the party, claiming that they were proof that the structure was very old, as wind veins generally weren't used in modern trap-making. There was a script written in Giant with large characters that ran across the entire room, which Kara translated as, "A star has fallen here." The group decided to rest before facing what lay beyond the doors, so they pushed all the dead kobolds to one side and slept. They had found plenty of lantern oil topside, so they kept one lantern burning throughout the night. The party took turns taking watch, and nothing happened until near the end of Kara's shift. Kara had taken a walk around the chamber to take a good look at the intaglio on the walls when she noticed something. Although it was barely perceptible, Kara saw a tiny, disc-shaped distortion above her, near the ceiling. It was a scrying sensor. Someone was watching them. Kara tried to use her arcane knowledge to disable or misdirect it, but nothing she did seemed to work. She woke up Tess, and the two of them analyzed it for several minutes. While they weren't able to stop it, Tess was able to determine that the source of the scrying was nearby, about a mile to the northwest of their current location. They also concluded that whoever it was must have been an accomplished spellcaster to give them so much trouble. Deciding that there was little they could do about it for the time being, Kara finished her watch, and she and Tess told Morden and Sienna about it in the morning. Morden pulled one of the stone double doors open, and our heroes braced themselves for whatever lay beyond. They shined their lanterns into the room beyond the door. It was a 20 by 20 foot room, made of the same gray stone bricks as the first chamber. The ceiling wasn't as high, but it was still at least 10 feet tall. There appeared to be an altar with a sun emblem on it in the center of the room. Sienna went in first and checked the room for traps, but didn't find any. There were 2 knobs in the center of each wall on either side of the altar, north and south, which resembled brass doorknobs. The altar was a raised stone pillar made of the same material as the floor, ceiling, and walls. Sienna turned one of the knobs, but nothing happened. Then he and Kara turned both knobs at the same time, and still nothing happened. The party poked around a bit more and used their wand to detect secret doors to discover a hidden door on the south wall that blended in perfectly with the bricks. There didn't seem to be any way to open it. They tried the knobs again, and while the door didn't react, Sienna heard something clicking inside of the altar. He found a panel on the side of the altar that he was able to pry open with Morden's help, which revealed a set of gears inside. The rogue watched the gears rock back and forth, while Kara and Tess tried the knobs again and concluded that it was stuck. He chipped away at the rust on the gears and had the girls try the knobs every so often to see if they would turn, but they still wouldn't move. Morden suggested greasing the gears with some of their lantern oil, and Sienna applied a generous amount to all of the gears he could reach. After that, the altar started to rise after the knobs were turned, stopping just a few feet from the ceiling. Morden hoisted Sienna onto the top of the altar, where he found another brass knob on the ceiling. He turned it, and the formerly secret door slid to one side, revealing another room to the south. Before continuing, Sienna reactivated the blade traps in the cylindrical chamber where they had started, and Tess asked Fernando to stay behind and keep watch. The ferret climbed up the open door and took position on top, and Tess blew him a kiss before returning with the others to the secret door. The party shined their lights into the chamber before entering. It was another 20 by 20 room, similar to the first, but there was no altar. There were some burlap sacks in the northwest corner of the room. Once again, Sienna went in first, and carefully searched for traps, but he didn't find any. What he did find was another brass doorknob set into the wall opposite of the door. The others entered and had a look around. Morden picked at the bags, but only found some yellow mold. Disrupting the mold filled the air with spores that made Morden sneeze, but otherwise didn't affect him. Using the wand to detect secret doors, Tess found another rectangular door to the east, about 4 feet off of the floor. Sienna turned the knob, hoping to open the secret door, but instead the door they had just gotten open slid shut, trapping them in the room. Sienna proposed that the knob was probably broken, and started taking the knob apart to see how it worked. The knob was just within reach of the kobold while standing on his toes and with his legs almost completely straight. A feat almost impossible for adult kobolds. Fortunately, Sienna was young and limber, and stretching his legs only caused him mild discomfort. Morden began probing the east door, trying to find its exact edges, but it appeared to be seamlessly integrated into the wall, just like the other secret door. Meanwhile, as Sienna fiddled with the internal mechanisms of the knob, some foul-smelling water started to drip in from the hole he had created. At first it was just a trickle, but the stream of water steadily grew stronger and faster as time went on. The room began to fill with water, and soon it was up to their ankles. The group was worried. Fearing that they could drown, Tess cast an enlarged person on Morden so he could break down the door they had come in through, and Sienna changed his priorities from getting the secret door open to plugging up the hole. With the water coming in fast, Sienna struggled against it, especially when the water level rose above his head. He took a deep breath and continued to work underwater. Kara used a shatter spell to weaken the north door, and Morden managed to smash it down. Water rushed northward to fill the 2 prior chambers, and with the water level lowered, Sienna could stand and breathe again. Tess began to feel Fernando's anxiety as the room he was in suddenly began filling with water too, and she shouted back to him to remain calm. This bought the party some time, yet the water level once again began to rise, and an enlarged Morden started to try and break the eastern door down. Sienna held his breath again when the water overtook him. The water rose high enough to overtake Kara and Tess, who started kicking their legs to stay afloat. They held their lanterns high to prevent them from being doused. Finally, the rogue was able to cram enough stuff into the hole to plug it up. He kicked his way to the surface to report the good news to the rest of the group, and started flailing around because he was a poor swimmer. Morden, who is nearly as tall as the room and not threatened by the water due to his enlarged spell, reached down to pick up Sienna and set him on his shoulder. They weren't in immediate danger, so Morden could take his time beating on the stone panel. It finally cracked and broke, and Morden pulled the broken pieces away. Sienna hopped off of Morden through the doorway and scouted ahead. Tess then dismissed the enlarged spell so Morden could fit through the doorway, and he helped Kara and Tess up out of the water. The group found themselves in a cylindrical tunnel about 20 feet long, leading from west to east. It was just wide enough for them to walk single file through it. Another door lay at the end of the tunnel. The tunnel had a gridwork of iron bars set into it throughout its length from one end to the other. Sienna walked up to the door at the end of the tunnel to examine it. Tess, who was bringing up the rear, saw the bars around her begin to glow and crackle with tiny arcs of lightning. She sprung forward to avoid the electrified bars and knocked Kara forward, who tumbled into Morden. Sienna realized what had happened and immediately set to work disabling the trap, prying up the pressure plate he had inadvertently activated. Noting the steel cables attached to the bottom, he pulled up all of the slack. The energized bars powered down, and Sienna tied off the cables to one of the bars near the door so they wouldn't accidentally set the trap off again. The round wooden door was held in place with a latch, but just barely. It was old and rotten. When Morden flipped the latch, the door slid to one side and fell apart. The tunnel was set a few feet from the floor like on the other side, so Sienna hopped down to the ground and began searching the room for traps while Morden shined his lantern inside the room. No traps were found, but they did find 2 wooden doors reinforced with iron bars to the north and south. Sienna began examining the doors, and found that each of them was equipped with a needle trap designed to stab anyone trying to use the handle. He disarmed the traps with ease. The party didn't find any clues about what the doors led to. They chose to open the north door first. It was stuck, so Morden had to shoulder it a few times to loosen it. When the door swung open, something was waiting for our heroes by the door. It was a gaunt, nearly skeletal corpse. Its ribcage was filled with a horrid, writhing viscera. It had a long purplish tongue tipped with sharp, black claws. The monster wasted no time, assaulting Morden with its razor-sharp fingers and clawed appendage. Morden's armor held up against its attacks rather well, but when Morden attempted to counterattack, the skeletal foe managed to dodge each swing of his falchion. Kara stepped up beside Morden while Sienna slipped into the dark room and snuck up behind the undead. The war mage unleashed a mighty orb of sound that rattled the monster's bones so hard that many of them were dislodged from its frame and scattered. Sienna sliced at it from the rear with his longsword while Tess pounded it with a quartet of magic missiles. The undead monstrosity had taken a beating, but it wasn't done yet. It once again dug into Morden with its claws. With each strike of the tongue appendage, Morden could feel that the claws burrowing into his body were accompanied by a numbing feeling that threatened to paralyze his entire body. But he managed to endure and shake off the effects each time. Ironically, the numbing agent just made fighting the creature hurt less. For all of its frightening appearance, the skeletal monster didn't last long in a prolonged fight surrounded by opponents. Sienna stabbed it a second time from behind, and it was brought down by an orb of acid from Kara, which melted it into a puddle of greenish ooze. Sienna set to work searching the room for traps while the others stepped over its gooey remains and entered the room it was guarding. The room was a bit smaller, but still made of the same gray bricks as before. There was nothing therein except for a treasure chest set against the north wall. Once Sienna was satisfied that there weren't any traps in the walls or floor, he closely examined the chest. Surprisingly, there was no trap or even a lock on the chest. They found 1,000 gold pieces, a golden circlet, and a belt made of many gold chains strung together. With a detect magic spell and some skillful scrutiny, they turned out to be a minor circlet of blasting and a belt of endurance. They returned to the previous chamber and opened the southern door. Unlike the rest of the dungeon so far, this room was lit. It was about the same size as the room they were in. The party could see that instead of stone brick, the room was covered with a shiny, reflective material that shed light. There was a 3-tiered stone fountain in the center of the room, which was still functional. Sienna went in and went about the usual business of searching for traps. The strangeness of the environment made him very suspicious, so he took an especially long time looking around. He was particularly bothered that he couldn't figure out what the reflective material was. The other 3 grew impatient and came in anyway, intrigued by the uniqueness of the room. The wand of detect secret doors once again assisted our heroes by indicating that there was another door on the east wall. A detect magic spell revealed that the water in the fountain had a mild enchantment aura. The water looked clean and pure. Sienna tasted the water, and it not only tasted good, but also gave him a warm and fuzzy feeling inside. Kara and Morden took a drink, and they determined that it had affected them with a bless spell. Tess then took a drink from the fountain, too. Sienna climbed to the top to see where the water was coming from, which was a small brass tube. He climbed into the middle bowl, looked around, and then down to the bottom. In the bottom area, he found a knob like the others they had previously encountered. Our heroes braced themselves, and Sienna reached into the water and turned the knob. The north door, from where they had entered the room, slammed shut, blending in seamlessly with the wall. The ambient light shut off, leaving the room in darkness where their lanterns didn't shine. A spiral of characters began to glow green above the, as of yet, unopened east door. Kara said that it was a sequence of numbers written in giant, starting at 20 and decreasing down to 0. As she explained, the number 20 winked out. Then the number 19 shut off. Then 18, 17, and 16. Tess expressed that she was worried as the lights turned from green to yellow. 15, 14, 13, 12, 11. The lights turned from yellow to orange, and Kara wondered aloud if they should stop it. 10 winked out, then 9, 8, 7, 6. Tess began to panic when the lights turned red and started flashing. 5, 4, 3. At Morden's urging, Sienna let go of the knob. Spring action inside of the knob returned it to its original position. The countdown numbers vanished, and the reflective surfaces of the ceiling and walls and floor began to shed light again. The room returned to the state where it had been before turning the knob, except that the north door did not reopen. Our heroes were stuck in the room. The group searched the room again. They examined their reflections in the walls, but didn't find anything significant. They checked the seams of the doors again, but were unable to pry them open. They finally decided that they would have to let the countdown come to its conclusion and see what would happen. Sienna turned the knob while the others covered the eastern door. As before, the room lights turned off, and the numbers began to glow. 20, 19, 18, 17, 16, green to yellow. 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, orange. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, red and flashing. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 0 disappeared. Time seemed to stand still. Then the lights turned back on, and the eastern door opened. Our heroes looked around to see if something else had happened, but that seemed to be it. They cautiously but quickly exited the room, afraid that the door would close itself before everyone got through. They found themselves in a large underground room, about 100 feet across and 30 feet wide, constructed of flagstone. There were 10 sarcophagi arranged in 2 rows and an obsidian obelisk at the far end of the room in front of a set of stone double doors, similar to those where they had begun. While Kara, Morden, and Tess spread out and looked at the sarcophagi, Sienna scanned the room for traps. The room and door seemed to be clear, but when he checked one of the stone coffins, he found that an herbal-based contact poison had been smeared around the coffin's lid. It was old and dried out, and Sienna wondered if it might actually still be toxic. But to be sure, he used his dagger to scrape it off. Sienna similarly scraped the poison off of all the sarcophagi. Morden pushed the lid off of a coffin. There was a giant-sized skeleton lying within. Remembering the crypt in the Venetian dungeon, they all closely scrutinized the skeleton before grabbing the copper coins that had been buried with it. There was nothing else with it or in it. It was just a skeleton. Tess wasn't happy about robbing graves, but Morden reassured her that it was okay. They opened the other coffins and found many more copper coins. They also found a tiger eye gem and a potion of cat's grace. Of particular importance to Morden, he found a large falchion that had been buried with one of the skeletons. It had a golden hilt and a shining white blade. He removed it, and the falchion resized itself to accommodate Morden. He replaced the magical falchion with his masterwork weapon, and began using the magic falchion from that time forward. There was writing on the obelisk in a language none of them knew, so Tess cast Comprehend Languages and read it aloud to the others. It said, "Here lies Mephistopheles." The sound of that name filled our heroes with dread, so they decided not to mess with it and carried on. There were so many coins that they couldn't carry them all, so they placed them all in a single pile to make it easier to collect them when they left. Morden pulled open one of the double doors, and they all peered into the next room. It appeared to be a 25-foot by 25-foot room, made of gray stone bricks, like some of the other rooms had been. There was a light source here, an ever-burning torch in the northeast corner of the room. In the flickering torchlight, our heroes saw someone lying on a fur rug against the eastern wall, opposite of the door. A tall female, with pinkish skin, long blonde hair, and a pair of white, moth-like wings, wearing a loose white toga. The party entered the room as she began to stir, and stood to meet them. She spoke in common and introduced herself as Fallen Star. Morden asked if she was the one who appeared to him in his mind. She said yes, and told him and the others that a great reward lay in store for them for having rescued her from this prison. Fallen Star told them to follow her, and headed out of the chamber through an open archway to the south. She led them to a large cavernous room. This chamber appeared to be naturally occurring, and even had stalagmites and stalactites. The cavern was about 60 feet from top to bottom, 80 feet across east to west, and 100 feet from north to south. The archway was about halfway up the height of the cavern's side, and stairs were carved into the stone that led to the bottom. Another archway with a stone door was set into the west wall, which was also about halfway up the wall, but had no set of stairs leading up to it. Fallen Star glided over to the southwest corner of the room, and showed our heroes the treasure there. A pile of gold coins, a few gems, a potion, a scroll, and a pair of metal bracers. Our heroes started to examine the treasure, and continued to ask Fallen Star questions about why she was imprisoned there, and why she appeared to Morden when he died. Fallen Star replied that the giants who once ruled over the island had captured her, and held her here in one of their treasure vaults because it was already well protected with traps. She appeared to Morden to motivate him to rescue her, once again indicating the treasure and encouraged them to take it. While our heroes were busy with the treasure, she turned away from them, took flight, and flew toward the southeast corner of the cavern. Kara called out to her, asking what she was doing. When Fallen Star failed to answer, she became suspicious and took flight herself, flying over to the archway where they had entered the room. Fallen Star touched something on the wall and headed toward the archway as well. She screamed at Kara to get out of the way, but the war mage refused to move. Meanwhile, the others had taken notice of Fallen Star's strange behavior and started toward the archway to assist Kara, but they weren't able to make it. Without warning, gravity within the chamber suddenly reversed, and Morden, Tess, and Sienna were slammed against the ceiling and showered with gold coins. The fall upward badly hurt them, but luckily they all survived. Fallen Star charged Kara and tried to push past her, but the war mage threw her aside. Upon touching Fallen Star, Kara realized that her appearance was an illusion. Her true form was revealed to Kara, that of a statuesque and curvy succubus, with flawless alabaster skin, twisted raven hair, and large bat-like wings. The demon lunged at Kara again, trying to start a grapple and bite her, but Kara once again threw the demonic being off of her. The reverse gravity trap wore off, and Morden, Tess, and Sienna were unceremoniously flung to the floor. Once they had regained their bearings, Morden and Sienna drew their weapons and dashed towards the succubus. She still looked the same to them, but knew that Kara needed their help. After she had stood up, Tess considered a shout spell, but with Kara and the fiend wrestling, she was afraid of striking her friend by mistake. She instead cast Magic Missile, and the demonic being was struck by a quartet of invisible force projectiles. The impact momentarily stunned the succubus, and Kara took the opportunity to blast her with an orb of fire. The fiendish woman shielded her face with her arms, and the fiery orbs seemed to wash over her body without harming her. The succubus once again tried to shove the war mage to one side, but Kara held her ground. Her skin felt numb where the succubus had touched her, but the war mage's willpower was too strong for the demon's curse to affect her. Though both Morden and Sienna had run as fast as they could, Morden reached the enemy first and plunged his blade into her back. The demon fell forward, and her true form was revealed to all. Morden stabbed her a couple more times, just to make sure she was dead. The entire group took some time to recuperate, and healed themselves using their magic items. They searched the demon's body and found out that her toga functioned as a robe of resistance, and she also carried a glass cutter and a set of small magnets. Morden was disappointed that Fallen Star had turned out to be a fake, but held out hope that the real Fallen Star could be found. For now, they decided to try the western door. Kara flew up to the door and blasted it open with a shatter spell. She then carried Sienna up to the archway. He found a sturdy column nearby that he tied some rope around and then let it down so that Morden and Tess could climb up. Kara monitored their progress climbing, while Sienna began searching the new room for traps. This chamber was about 150 feet east to west and 50 feet north to south. It was constructed of gray stone bricks. The western wall opposite of the door was a curtain of reddish-orange flames. There was a pile of treasure in the northeast corner, and a dais with a throne on top set against the north wall. There was a column near the eastern door where he had tied the rope, and another on the other side of the room in the southwest corner, directly in front of the wall and fire. Once they were together, the group approached the throne. There was a figure seated upon it, clad in a spiked closed helm and black plate armor about 8 feet tall. They could see pale yellow flesh and black pupilless eyes behind the eye slits in the helm. Tess spoke to it, but there was no response. She and Kara examined it, looking closely without touching it. It wasn't breathing. They wondered if it was an undead creature or some sort of golem. Finally, Morden gently prodded one of its legs with his falchion. That got its attention. The figure stood and spoke in Giant, commanding that they state their business. Kara translated, so Tess cast tongues on herself and responded that they were visiting. In a booming voice, the armor-clad figure demanded to know the passcode. Our heroes huddled up and brainstormed. After a brief exchange of ideas, they decided to try the proper name Kara had seen in the Venetian dungeon, so Kara turned to the figure and said, Aeon. The figure's reply was, incorrect. It turned around and started to reach for something. Thinking fast, Tess asked what was written in the first chamber with the dead kobolds. Kara quickly yelled in Giant, A star has fallen here. The huge figure turned back to face our heroes and stated, That is correct. It sat back down on the throne and went still. Our heroes collectively breathed a sigh of relief and left the dais alone from that point forward. They searched the room to see if anything had changed, and noted that the treasure in the northeast corner consisted of a huge pile of copper pieces, jewelry, a breastplate, a shield, at least 2 scrolls, and an ornate heavy mace. They decided not to touch any of it for now. It was at this point Tess suddenly felt a swell of fear and anxiety from her familiar. She then felt his discomfort from being cold and wet. Tess realized that if Fernando tried to reach our heroes, he might accidentally trap himself and drown. She asked Morden for the Ring of Wishes, put it on, and wished for Fernando to return to her. A gem vanished from the ring, and Fernando appeared next to Tess in a cloud of smoke. Fernando hurriedly reported to Tess that he had seen a pair of dark elves climbing down into the chamber he was in, and she shared the information with the rest of the party. After quickly searching the room again, everything looked the same, so the group went and had a good look at the wall of fire. Sienna reached out to touch it, and he could feel warmth coming off of it before his hand actually came in contact with the flames, so he decided not to touch it after all. The rogue suggested that Morden might be tough enough to run through with a fire-resistance spell and survive. But Morden replied that they couldn't see anything through it, and for all they knew, there was just a solid wall behind the fire. While staring at the flames, Sienna noticed something. The pattern of fire behind the pillar was slightly out of sync with the rest of the wall. As he reached behind the column to test the wall, the column instantly transformed into a silk-draped, gray-skinned female figure wielding a jeweled bastard sword. The creature spoke in Giant, demanding to know the passcode. The tongue spell was still in effect, so Tess answered with, "A star has fallen here." The golem stepped to the side and transformed back into a column. With the way now clear, Sienna gingerly reached out to touch the portion of firewall that had been behind the column, and there was no warmth. He was able to reach through it without harm. That section of wall was an illusion. They all passed through it. What lay beyond was a tiny section of room, and in its center there was a tall female with pink skin, long blonde hair, and white, moth-like wings, wearing a white toga. She looked precisely as her impersonator's illusion had depicted, except that she had her eyes closed and remained motionless. Tess wondered if she was an illusion too. She was suspended in midair, and our heroes quickly discovered that she was surrounded by a wall of force on all sides, which were quite real and quite sturdy. The party circled the room, searching for any weakness in the prison or any clue on how to free her. At one point, Morden tried hitting one of the walls as hard as he could. The woman opened her eyes and immediately began pounding on the invisible wall with her fists. Her face was contorted in panic, and she opened her mouth as if to scream over and over, but the party couldn't hear her. They watched her frenzy not knowing what to do. It was then they heard a male voice calling out to them from behind, beyond the wall of fire, inviting them to step back into the main chamber. Our heroes definitely did not want to do that, and tried conversing with him through the fire. They couldn't see each other. The voice repeatedly tried to coax them out, first thanking them for clearing the way to the end of the dungeon, and encouraging them to take all of its treasures with them. He was only interested in the imprisoned woman. The party stalled, but whomever the voice belonged to eventually lost patience. They heard him turn to one side and demand the wall of fire be brought down. Our heroes heard what sounded like wind blowing and water splashing on the floor. After a few minutes of enduring whatever spells were being used on it, a 10-foot section of the wall sputtered and was extinguished. Our heroes were now face to face with an especially tall kobold, wearing red, purple, and blue garish clothing. A dark elf wearing similar garb flanked him on either side. Tess tried to question the kobold as to who the woman was and why he wanted her. He replied that she belonged to him, and their relationship was none of her business. Sienna asked if he was the one who enslaved the kobolds, and he admitted that he was, and also stated that even though recapturing the escaped kobolds would be a hassle, he was willing to overlook it. The parley continued for several minutes, with the kobold revealing little else. Eventually it reached the point where he attempted to bribe them with even more gold, in addition to the dungeon's treasures. Our heroes repeatedly refused to yield. The kobold finally turned to his minions and ordered them to attack. After issuing that order, the kobold's visage suddenly became more fearsome and frightening. Our heroes panicked and scattered, all of them, including Fernando, uncontrollably trying to flee from him. Sienna hid in the main chamber while the others retreated behind the remaining walls of flame. The female drow blasted Kara, Morden, and Tess with a cone of bitter cold as they turned tail and ran, and the male drow unsheathed his scimitar and rushed after them. The enemy kobold cast a red ray of fire and scorched Tess. Morden was panicked but still capable of defending himself. While he and the male drow dueled, Kara managed to shake off the fear enchantment. The enemy kobold screamed at his drow minion to get out of the way, while Kara prepared to cast a spell. She cast Phantasmal Killer on the male drow. And whatever he saw was the last thing he saw before dropping dead. The female drow rushed forward and grabbed his body, dodging a stab from Tess's spear before retreating. The enemy kobold watched his minions flee and let loose a blast of fiery ashes from his mouth. Kara, Morden, and Tess dove for cover to avoid the worst of it. The kobold then sprouted wings, turned around, and began to fly away. Kara immediately gave chase, following him back the way they came. Neither could fly at full speed in the cramped corridors of the dungeon, and Kara managed to get within casting distance while they crossed the tall, cavernous chamber where the reverse gravity trap had been. She overtook the fleeing drow, but ignored them, leaving them for her friends to deal with. She wanted that kobold. Kara cast Melf's acid arrow, striking the winged kobold in the rear with multiple acidic projectiles. He flew through the chamber where they had found the succubus and into the large room with the sarcophagi. Kara got off another Melf's acid arrow spell on him before he was stopped. The door leading back to the room with the fountain was shut. The kobold futilely slammed against the door and then turned toward Kara. In a split second, the kobold changed shape. His wings enlarged, and his frame grew 3 times as wide and 7 times taller. His limbs and tail lengthened to match the proportions of his new size. His scales turned to a reddish-brown color. Kara was no longer facing a kobold. She was facing down a mature adult dragon that took up half the room. Meanwhile, Morden, Tess, and Sienna pursued their enemies on foot. They caught up to the drow, and while Tess was able to get off a magic missile spell, they teleported away before our heroes could finish them off. The dragon let loose a blast of burning ashes at Kara. She tried to evade it by ducking behind a coffin, but she didn't move quite quick enough to escape the flames. The entire front of her body was burnt to a crisp from head to toe, and she looked down at her charred body, but couldn't feel any pain due to the nerves having been destroyed. She fainted from the sight of her own wounds. By the time her companions had caught up to her, the dragon was long gone. The entire western wall had been knocked down. Morden stabilized Kara while Tess administered a health potion to her. Kara further healed herself and the others using her wands, and also explaining that she had seen the winged kobold transform into a dragon. Sienna remarked that it sounded like something between a red dragon and a brass dragon. The group grimly returned to the entrapped woman. She had stopped panicking, and when she realized that they couldn't hear her, she tried to help the party free her via pantomiming what they needed to do. She pointed down, and they could see several depressions of different sizes at the base of her magic container. The charades went on for several minutes. Tess first tried to stick the butt of her spear into the holes, but that didn't seem to do anything. She then tried inserting the varied gemstones they had collected in the dungeon, but they didn't seem to fit. Finally, they realized that the magnets were the keys to unlocking the prison. Tess arranged them in the correct order, and the walls of force vanished. The pink-skinned woman took a deep breath and fell forward. Morden caught her and helped her to her feet. Once she had gathered her wits, she thanked the group for freeing her and introduced herself as Fallen Star. She looked to Morden and told him that he was the man she saw in her visions, and he replied that he had also had a vision of her and asked why she had reached out to him. She told Morden that her powers were suppressed within the prison, but she supposed it to be an answer to her prayers for freedom. Fallen Star told him that the vision had been of her patron, Selene, the Archangel of Redemption, and head of the Vesperine choirs. She further explained that Selene was a bright Lilith, the same kind of Vesper as she was. Fallen Star then squinted hard at Morden and inquired if he was a hexblade. He replied that he had been, but he wasn't sure anymore. She asked if he was unable to hex others, and he answered that that is what seemed to be the case. Morden wondered how she knew, and Fallen Star replied that while people like him were rare, he wasn't the first to walk down this path. She elaborated that she could see his soul was pure and noble, and because of that, he was no longer able to wield the power of the hex. But there was a way to regain those abilities he had lost by turning his curses into blessings. Evil magic, she explained, was like an evil heart. Turn it around, and it changes to good. Morden asked how one could obtain such power, and the Vesper said that she could impart it to him if he so desired. Morden desired it, so Fallen Star cast a spell and put a palm on his forehead. She held it there for about a minute, and Morden's attire became white as snow. When she finished, she asked him if he knew what to do. Armed with newfound magical knowledge, he answered in the affirmative. She then declared him to no longer be Morden the Grey. He was now Morden the White. Having seen him during the fight, Fallen Star then warned the group that the kobold they had fought was Califax. Tess was dying to know how and why she ended up where she did, and Fallen Star patiently explained that she had once worked for Califax, and also was from the plane of Purnima, like him. She further explained that he was a rust dragon, a race of dragonkind native to the Sea of Rust. He was a skillful spellcaster who made judicious use of the polymorph spell. He had several favorite forms that he liked, such as that of a chain devil, a kobold, a giant, or a half-elf. When Morden asked what class of spellcaster he was, she replied that he was a bard. Morden scoffed at the notion that a bard could be any serious threat, but Fallen Star retorted that Califax was likely the most dangerous bard he would ever meet, and continued her story. Their relationship had been intimate. Very intimate. However, as Califax obtained more and more victories during his conquest of the Western Islands, his interest in romance waned. Like most Lilim, Fallen Star thought she had everything that she could desire, power and love. Yet without the latter, she realized that the former no longer mattered to her. Later, when Califax's empire began to crumble, she was lured down into the vault, where the group found her and sealed there. Califax had betrayed one of his other lieutenants, a chiton named Cadenissimo, in a similar fashion. She had always suspected that Califax had sensed her change of heart and had arranged for her capture, but never knew for sure. Sienna solicited Fallen Star for more information about Califax's capabilities, having never heard of rust dragons before. She said that while he was never forthcoming about his powers, in addition to his polymorph spells, she had observed him use 2 different breath weapons. One, of course, was the cone of fire they had already experienced. The other was a burst of fine metal particles that rusted away metal items, even magical ones at times. She said that he had to swallow a mouthful of dirt or rocks before using that breath weapon. He had the ability to resist many spells, and could summon an aura of fear to surround him, which the party had also already experienced. She said the range was about 200 feet, give or take. He had the ability to heal himself, and frequently employed Wall of Iron spells to crush opponents. Tess then asked why Califax would want her back so badly, and she replied that it was probably to make use of her ability to open portals. Fallen Star said that in addition to her Lilith powers, she was an accomplished wizard in her own right. Califax had once made use of her skills to move armies from one place to another, and was probably hoping to convince, or force, her to do the same. At this point, she said that she wanted to leave, and they could talk more on the way out, so the party started gathering treasure and thinking of more questions to ask Fallen Star. And that is where our session ended. Please like the video and subscribe to our channel to continue following the story of our heroes. Transcripts of our Dungeons & Dragons sessions are available at www.lawful-evil.org/DND. If you enjoyed this and don't already play the game this is based on, you can explore the world of Alter Aeon for yourself by visiting www.alteraeon.com. Remember, the family that plays together stays together. Thanks for listening, and happy mudding, everybody.
Alteraeon.com. That's ALTERAEON.com.